I came into Christianity the same way as many others, looking for something real. Something to explain all the truth, goodness, and beauty I found in the world. Growing up in the particularly beautiful Pacific Northwest and having a background in music led my desire to find the artist responsible for everything that I experienced. So when I came to belief in God, I expected it to be the end of my long journey of searching. I was ready to take on the world, to soar, to find transcendent beauty, and to step into fellowship with all these people who had found the good and true God. If only I had known what was coming. In my book, I share snapshots of my experiences in the church, experiences that shaped me and my beliefs. They are stories of my searching for answers to questions born of heartbreak when what I found wasn't what I longed for. Do you feel the ever-present tension of the beauty of salvation alongside the ugliness of human hypocrisy? You're not alone. If you're uncomfortable in the church, but you feel the risk of commitment calling, this book is for you. In a time when many people are stepping away from faith, I found reasons to stay. I can't promise any tidy endings, but there's still an irresistible hope. A transforming grace and truth of Christ, and it's why I still believe.
Hi, my name is Dr. Caius Obeada, founder of Vaxday Ministry and Vaxday Institute of Apologetics and Reasonable Faith Romanian Chapter Director. Today, I have the honor to talk with Mary Jo Sharp, author of the book, Why I Still Believe, a former atheist who encountered for the first time apologetics while seeking answer in her spiritual search. Mary Jo is now an assistant professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University and the founder and director of Confident Christianity Apologetics Ministry. She has been featured in Christianity Today cover story, The Unexpected Defenders, and it is an international speaker on apologetics, focusing on love and logic to uncover truth. She lives with her husband and family in Portland, Oregon. Welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's really good to be here.
So the first question is related to your to the fact that you are from the Northwest. So you're raised in the Pacific Northwest in a non-religious family. When did you identify you as an atheist and why?
Yeah, that's a good question, because growing up without church in my life, I didn't really know what an atheist was. Obviously didn't have a lot of philosophy in my life either. I didn't know what an atheist was until I began to study apologetics, because I'd never heard that word growing up. So even after becoming a Christian, I knew there were people who didn't believe in God, but I didn't know that they would be called atheist if that's what they had committed to. It was once I began to study apologetics that I reflected back on what I was growing up and realized that that's what I was atheist growing up. Some atheists would disagree with me, because I would say I was a person who was a non-theist who just didn't believe in God and hadn't actively pursued atheist philosophy or understanding that. So it was actually years down the road after becoming a Christian and doubting my faith that I understood that I was atheist. But I knew growing up that I didn't believe in God. And I didn't know what to do with Christianity or Christians. I didn't think that was the normal type. I thought they were sort of on the fringe of society, that religious people would be fringe and atheism was more normal or mainstream.
Well, you eventually found your way to faith in Christ. Can you tell us a little bit about the story, how it happened?
Yeah, I didn't grow up in church, like I said. And the part of the country in America that I'm from, they're considered kind of post-Christian. Being that as a contrast to the parts of America that are very still deeply culturally religious. So the area that I grew up in, religion was a very private matter. And so we didn't talk about it a lot. And even the Christians didn't talk about it a lot. So, and there weren't a lot of churches around as well. So, my Christianity was what I saw. I mean, my Christianity, what I knew of Christianity was what I saw on television and in the movies. So it was very shallow. And what I did have growing up, though, was an experience of the great beauty of the Pacific Northwest and of the beauty of what humans could do through the arts. I also had a family who, my dad loved outer space, he loved cosmology, and he taught me to wonder at the universe in which I lived. So over the years, these areas profoundly impacted me, and so much so that I believe that these were drawing me to understand what's behind all of this. What does this all mean, and how do I relate to this vast universe in which I live? And at that time, I was an older teenager, so I'm getting towards the end of my high school education in America. And I have a music teacher who was a Christian who hadn't shared his faith with a student like me before. I think he says he hadn't really publicly shared his faith with somebody else. So that he shared with me about Christianity. He said, he gave me a Bible when I was about to graduate from high school. And he said, when you go off to university, you're going to have hard questions. I hope you'll turn to this. And he gave me that Bible. And he reminds me that he also prayed with me. I don't even remember that part. But that sort of changed things for me. That was kind of the impetus for me to start digging into what I believed. And I started looking in the Bible. And it was the Bible, reading through the Bible, that actually convinced me that there's probably a God and that I'm responsible to this God. So I began to visit churches when I was at university, and I found one in which I heard a clear explanation of the need for a savior. And I was excited when all the pieces that I had been thinking on finally came together in Jesus Christ. So that's where I trusted Jesus for my salvation.
Well, it sounds interesting experience, and it kind of remind me also of mine, but it looks like you have some culture shock when you first joined the church. And you wrote something interesting, that on Sunday that you were going to publicly commit yourself to the church for the first time, the pastor's wife shamed you about the dress you're wearing. I almost can see that. So how does this affect your relationship with the church? Did keep you from the church? I got 3 girls that I can say that probably went to the same shock that you did.
Well, it's funny because I was kind of a poor university student, and so I had 2 dresses, and I wore the one I thought was better. So what happened for me is that that sort of public shaming on that first day, and that's, like I said, that's what you said. This is the day I'm going to commit to Christ publicly and tell the church that I've become a believer. It caused me to begin to distrust authorities in the church. And that's the basic level of it. I wasn't expecting that the first thing I heard as a new believer would be that I needed better clothing. I was really excited, but I was nervous to come into fellowship with these people professing to believe in this good and true and beautiful God. I expected to find people in the church that would be actively holding themselves accountable to this sort of God, that they would be markedly different, that they would actually bear the mark of the transcendent one. So I went in a little naive with some really high expectations, but instead I was met with this very banal, derogatory remark about what I was wearing. And it thrust me into sort of a defensive position. So that's a very wrong thing to do to a brand new believer, but I was angry and confused at the time. But I wasn't super angry. I was more confused. That was more confusing to me because I didn't know anything about church. And it led me to wonder how a leader in Christianity can miss something so simple as to just encourage a brand new believer and to, look past the exterior of that person. So I actually had to walk up the aisle that day, because it was one of those churches where you walk the aisle to show everybody that you've committed to Jesus Christ. And so I had to walk up in front of this whole church in that apparently inappropriate dress to make my commitment. It was very hard for me, having come from a culture in which belief was very private. So I would say from the first day, my relationship with the church had been tainted towards distrust, and distrust with the people who say they're accountable to God. But then over time, that distrust began to spread towards God himself, and to the point of questioning why I believed in him at all. I did keep going to that first church because I didn't know anything about what church should look like. So it was actually, I was a young married, I was married in college, and I actually was trusting in my husband's church background at this point. So, and I also I don't back down from things very easily. I'm typically a little bit of a fighter. So there was that. And then there were sweet people in the church. So I kept going.
Well, the combination of being a fighter, because that's what apologists usually, they have that kind of fisty, character, and they're strong. But you also ended up in, a Baptist, and you know that the Baptists kind of look at those, how you look and how you dress, how you walk and all that. Yeah. But you're right that you had been looking for a life-changing, Christ-focused community, a church family with a real accountability to a transcendent and objective good that they pursue as actually true. And it wasn't where to find. How does this impact your faith? Because it impact also many of our youth today. Especially, and I'm not saying only in America, but, if you look all around the world, and I can see that in Italy, my wife being Italian, right now she's in Italy, in Rome right now, but in Romania, the youth, they have a little bit problem when they encounter the fake people of faith. How would it impact you?
Yeah, so it affected me greatly. By the end of our time at our second church, because we got into ministry really quickly, and by our second church, my faith in church people had flatlined, and my faith in God needed resuscitation. I was really heartbroken, actually, that what I was looking for when I was reading through the Bible, it didn't match what I found. I didn't find what I was looking for or what I hoped to find. And I began to realize that although people said that they believed in God, I wasn't finding a lot of people who lived as though God was real real to them in their lives. So I found a lot of people, which you've made some comments about things that they care about. I found people who cared about the least of concerning of things like clothing, whether or not we have chairs or pews in the church, what color the carpet is, or what style of music we're listening to for worshiping to. So I found people who didn't really bother themselves much with truly spending time to learn deeply about the God that they professed, and then letting that knowledge change them and give them sort of a peace so they could be a redemptive force in the world. And that situation led to a lack of authentic community. And I think when you talk about youth who are looking at the church, they see that. They see the lack of authenticity in the church. So you profess to believe in this objective good, this source of our morality and our, and also of objective truth, the source of our truth, but you're not really making an effort to conform your life to that. And I think that's what impacted me. And it actually is what made me begin to doubt my faith. And I think that's one of the things that's happening across the church, across the world, is the youth are saying, hey, you're not even trying to live like this is true. So there's that, it's an emotional inspired doubt is what it is, but that leads to intellectual questioning. And what happened to me was I had this, even though that was happening to me, I had this constant reminder in my mind that although people don't act like something is true, that doesn't mean it isn't true. And so these hypocritical attitudes and behaviors of Christians couldn't actually be the litmus test for the truth of Christianity. As painful as some of my experiences were, I knew that was what was right. And so even though I went through a time where I felt very unloved by church people, I realized I would have to discover if I actually thought Christianity was true. So that's what got me, that is actually what launched me into apologetics. It's just searching for, through my time of doubt, like what is actually true.
It's very fascinating. But now your career as an apologist professor is based on helping others understand and share arguments that support Christianity. But you yourself have serious doubt about your faith. Has that helped you when you are teaching and speaking to others about the rationality of faith?
Oh, yeah, very much so. Yes, we're done. No, yeah, because not only did I doubt my faith after becoming a Christian, but being that I was raised outside of Christianity, and I had that idea that religious people were sort of the fringe people on society, that I think that has helped me. My former youthful atheism reminds me of what life was like when I wasn't a believer in God. And that background helps me not distrust a person automatically because they say they're atheist. And I know that actually sounds kind of judgmental, but I come across that in Christianity where people automatically judge a person because they say they're atheist. So, or they get uncomfortable around that person. So this helps me to say, I don't know what their background is, but then I can have a discussion with them. And then because of having gone through doubt myself and doing a lot of searching on theological and philosophical questions, that helps me not be, first of all, intimidated when speaking to somebody who has a differing point of view than mine. So I'm comfortable with them where they're at because I'm comfortable in my own beliefs, because I have studied my beliefs and I know why I believe them. So I tend to be a bit more interested in how other people arrived at their point of view rather than just wanting to be combative. You know what I mean? That instead of trying to just be evaluative, I use the word combative. I don't ever want to be combative, but not of the person, maybe of the ideas that we're throwing back and forth. More of the correct term would be evaluative, but it helps me, I think, be more empathetic towards people so I can hear their arguments. And it also gives me the confidence to engage those arguments.
I was talking the other day with Dr. David Horner, and he was telling me that, many people that they lost their faith has to do somehow with apologetics reasons. And many lose their faith for a rational reason. And you initially thought that was the case in your situation, but then you realized something else going on. Can you tell us about that? What else is going on?
Yeah. So that's kind of what people think today, right? Is that you lose your faith because of intellectual questioning. And there's even a saying that, belief in God can be intellectual suicide. Like if you are a believer in God, you can't, obviously you're not a thinker. But what I found was when I began to doubt what I believed, first of all, I didn't have the intellectual or emotional depth in my faith to be able to aptly describe what it was that was happening to me. I wasn't able to say, oh, I'm having intellectual doubt. Also, I naively believed that as I started looking at the faith, I naively believed that I could purely and simply have intellectual doubt about God. And I think that's an important point. Beliefs are never formed in a vacuum. There's no simple and pure intellectual doubt. I can't actually remove myself from my experiences, from my emotional memory, remove myself from myself in order to do a completely objective survey on my beliefs. So I don't trust people that say that it's just intellectual, because humans just don't operate like that. That's not how we function. So I think when people say it's just intellectual reasons they leave the faith, that's a little bit optimistic and maybe idealistic and maybe a little of a modern fairy tale. I've come to realize that the onset of my doubt began with distrust of persons. Mm-hmm. And when I began to distrust people in the church, it moved from churchgoers to church leaders. And then I said earlier, it transferred over to my distrust of God, because you know what? God has personhood. So it makes sense that when you distrust people, that you're also going to transfer that over to the person of God. So in my exploration for answers, I had to deal with that personal side of things, that maybe I didn't want to trust God. Maybe I didn't desire to trust him. Maybe it's not as simple as just intellectual doubt. I don't know, somehow that sounds weaker or not as respectable to people as if I just had problems with the logical arguments. But I think it's honestly fueled by disgust that I saw at things in the church, or disgust at things I saw in the church. So, I try to romanticize it. It would be so much better if people would just live out what they believe, or if I could just return to my former atheism, or if we could just, argue the intellectual arguments. But I think part of the problem with dealing with these arguments is that things don't necessarily get better outside of Christianity, because it's not simple. And even in atheism, you still have the problems of the philosophical problems of human existence and meaning and value to handle. And then you still got the problem that atheists are just people, and they can be hypocritical, and they can cause emotional doubt. So it's not all just wrapped up in intellectual arguments, but there's a lot going on there.
Well, while you were in graduate school, you became close friends with Nabal Koresh and David Wood, who taught you that people and God were more important than having your own little heaven in a way you wanted to have it. I will ask you to introduce these two gentlemen for the Romanian audience.
Oh, okay.
And how did your friendship change your life?
Oh, yeah. So Nabeel Qureshi is a former Muslim. He is of Pakistani descent, and he became a Christian believer after arguing with his friend at university, David Wood, who was a former atheist who had become a Christian. And he's a psychopath. He actually, or sociopath. He says he's psychopath now, but so who came to belief in God while in jail. So they were on the same debate team and met each other and began to have arguments about belief in God. And then ultimately Nabeel becomes a Christian. And so he wrote a book called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, that became a New York Times bestseller. I met them both back before Nabeel was a New York Times bestseller in college. I keep saying college, that's university. But these two guys, so that's who they are. David Wood still has a ministry where he is engaging Islam, the ideas in Islam. Those two gentlemen, they were a big part of my early years of ministry, because they were the first two gentlemen in Christianity that really took my thoughts and work in ministry seriously. As if it really mattered. They saw what I could do intellectually and wanted to help me develop that and respected that. So my experience in church was they put me in doing whatever they needed a warm body for. You're available, you're a pastor's wife, let's just have you do that. So it was never attending to how I was actually gifted and what I could actually bring to the church. And David and Nabeel were the first ones that really valued what I specifically had to offer through rational argument and such. And so they gave me, I began to very deeply respect what they were doing, but they also gave me a respect for my own ability to do ministry. And it wasn't just with me, by the way. These two have encouraged so many people to use their unique voices to get involved in ministry. So that was one major thing that they did. The other is they taught me that I had a little bit of a selfish heart. They didn't tell me that. It was just from being in ministry with them that taught me. And what I mean by that is I did not want to be a public Christian. I was raised in a culture where religion was more private, and you kept it to yourself. And that's fine. Believe what you want, keep it to yourself. So I did not like the idea of having a public target placed on my back for being religious or for being a Christian. And I felt like becoming a public Christian you had this loss of autonomy and this loss of control in your life, because people can say whatever they want about you once you're in the public sphere, and you can't control the narrative. So if you choose this path that they were on, you give up some autonomy because you're accountable to this larger group of people, broader community. And then you also lose some of that control over the narrative of your life. And so they showed me that I was a little bit selfish there in that respect. But I also saw the anguish that Nabil went through leaving the community of Islam and how much he had to give up. And that was an ever-present burden on him. And by comparison, I never dealt with that. My family questioned me. They've made fun of me at times, but there was always a general respect, and they weren't devastated like his family was when I became a Christian. So I began to see that the world doesn't necessarily share a sort of live and let live attitude, and that I needed to be more concerned for people, especially people like Muslims who were trying to leave the faith and were leaving so much behind. So they came sort of crashing into my life. And instead of me saying I'm fine with my own little piece of, the world the way it is, where I can control it, they sort of taught me to get out there and to share my ideas and myself with the world.
Well, I'm gonna change the topic a little bit and talking about the private and running away from the public life. But I'm gonna ask you a question that it's much closer to you, in a sense that how did you deal with the problem of evil and suffering in your own life?
The problem of evil, the big question of mankind.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I actually teach a university course on this. It's coming up. But there's two parts of the question for me that I always try to acknowledge. One is the experiential side of the problem, and the other is the theoretical side. So let's start with the experiential. Everyone experiences pain and suffering to different extents and in different ways. And so it's difficult to reconcile the knowledge of the problem of evil with when somebody's experiencing the problem of evil. And there's a couple of reasons it's difficult. One is just because suffering is so hard. But the other is, I think that a lot of people don't think on the problem of evil until they experience something, until they're going through pain or they're going through evil. And at that point, they don't have any resources to fall back on because they've never thought about what the problem of evil is or why there is evil in the world. So, and I've seen this happen to a lot of Christians, that they have never seriously thought on reconciling why they say God is good with the amount of pain and suffering they see, or just evil in the world that they see. And when they don't have resources, when they're not thinking on it, they can fall away from faith in God during hard situations. So this is where the theoretical side comes in. And I think we need to teach this a lot more in our churches, is what is the problem of evil and how have Christians traditionally responded to that? So, for me personally, because the question was more directed about how have I reconciled it, I was acting in my life as if some things were good, some things are the way things should be, and that some things were evil or bad, that they shouldn't be like this. And I realized that that is in not just my life, but in everybody's life. We say they shouldn't have acted that way. This shouldn't happen. Life shouldn't be like this. They died too young. We have all these ought statements in our lives that assume this basis that some things are good and some things are evil. But how do you have to find a basis for where you're getting that from. How are you grounding those concepts? And I realized that I had never grounded those concepts anywhere, especially when I was a former atheist. I really had a commitment to right and wrong, but I didn't have that grounding for it. So why did I think things like injustice, suffering, murder, rape? Why did I think all those things were wrong? And not just the way the world is, not just this is how things are. Because if there's in a universe void of good and evil, there's no right or wrong. There just is. This is what happens. In fact, I think Richard Dawkins gets tangled up into this, the Oxford biologist, when he says that we're just dancing to the music of our DNA. He's saying these things happen, and he's actually saying there's no right or wrong, there's no good or evil to ground these ideas as wrong. So I never could have agreed with that. Even when I was atheist, I don't think anybody can live like that's true, because people are constantly conveying that they do believe in good and evil, so that there's a way things should be. So I sort of went looking for, well, what are we using as a standard? How are we saying this is how I know what good is? And for me, I found that goes back to an objectively good source, and that was God. And as I investigated it more and more, I found it was the Christian God. So the Christian story, to me, best explains the situation of good and evil, being that what God originally made was good, and that good has fallen. And now there is a situation in which we have a lot of not good, evil, suffering, pain in the world. And so in the Christian story, the thing that's unique is God takes on the consequence of human evil on himself and redeems us. He sacrifices himself for us and redeems us and brings us back, gives us that opportunity to come back into right relationship with him. That makes sense of what I'm seeing in the world, and it makes sense of our experiences here. So that's the theoretical part combined with the experiential part that has, sort of changed my point of view and how I've dealt with the problem of evil.
Dr. Montgomery, another great apologist, he was saying that the apologists and evangelists, they are working outside the city, pointing people towards the city, towards Christ. So many times they are being seen like outsiders of the church. So you're an apologist, you're a professor. I will ask you, do you still love the church, and why?
Yeah, it's a tough question. It's a fair question. I would say it's one, if I'm being completely honest, that I still struggle with, because I do love her, but I don't always like her. I always tell people it's like my marriage relationship. There are days you feel like you belong there. This is the best thing ever. And then there are days you wonder, what were you thinking? My husband will confirm that. We've been married for a very long time. We're coming up on 3 decades.
Oh, wow, congratulations. I'm finishing all the 4th. I'm going toward the 4th.
Oh, well, congratulations to you too.
Thank you.
Yeah, there are days when I feel like, I just don't belong there. And I kind of want to walk away. So I'm still struggling with it because of, human evil is not going to go away until the resurrection, the end, and we're all the final resurrection. And so I kind of have to live by Jesus's words in his Sermon on the Mount in Luke 6, when he said that we're supposed to do to others as we want done to ourselves. If you back up from that, he has a really, really hard teaching. This is love your enemies and do good to those who persecute you. And that has always been hard for me, because when the persecution is friendly fire from other Christians, that cuts really deep. And that can really shake your faith. So I try to do unto others as I want done to me. I try not to speak ill of them. I try not to undercut them, even when they do so to me. And I think the church is still extremely valuable with all her vices and all her failings. There's an author, Daniel Taylor, and he wrote in his book, The Myth of Certainty, he wrote, "What is amazing, however, is not that the church suffers from every kind of failing common to human beings, but that it is simultaneously still the primary instrument of God's work on earth." So the church represents the redemption of God, active in the world today. And so I still love her. She's hard to love sometimes, but and she will continue to fail me, as I will her. Caught up in our own vices, and as we grow throughout our life towards Christ-likeness, it's a struggle, but God's not caught off guard with that.
I was talking to Dr. David Horner and about this, and I said, one pastor asked me, what's my relationship as an apologist with the church? And I said, I remind him, I said, well, we are still part of the body. You may like it or may not like. I may be the pinky that you don't like it, but or the toe that you don't like it. But I'm still, part of the body, and we are part of the body.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much. And to the end, to close this nice dialogue and discussion, I would like to ask you about your ministry. And maybe you can tell us about the Romanian who is involved, but about your ministry, Confident Christianity Apologetic Ministry. If you can give us an introduction, tell us what you guys doing and how you come about to open this ministry.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. So Confident Christianity was the ministry I never intended to have. As you could note from earlier in the conversation. But it was it actually came about due to an assignment in a master's degree program where we were challenged to write a blog on the evidence of the resurrection. And that started my Confident Christianity blog, which is now maryjosharp.com. You can go there, you can check out the blog, you can go back really far and see those beginning writings. So that's my ministry seeks to train up people in the reasoning of the faith, to engage in dialogue on people who have objections to the faith, and really to build up confidence in having conversation in general. And I have my hand involved in a lot of things. I have a new Patreon show with my husband, who has been a pastor for many years. So we call it The Pastor and the Professor. So we dialogue on all sorts of theology and apologetics and Christian living and all sorts of good stuff on Patreon. I have a new project coming out with Savvy Ministries, currently found at savvyproject.org. And it is I think it's 15 video series on apologetics from Generation Z, so young people, actual narratives from Generation Z about their struggles in Christianity. So we actually interviewed people and built these videos off of them. And we used a world-class film production company. They're great. They come with a absolutely free curriculum to use in classes. So it'll change to be called Darkroom Faith. So if you're looking for it, Darkroom Faith is what it will come out as around April, in April. And then like I said, I'm involved in many things. So I'm also a professor of apologetics at Houston Baptist University, and we offer a fully online degree in apologetics, so a master's level degree, so you can go deeper in building confidence in your faith and building these arguments, encounter these arguments. And that can be found at hbu.edu/MAA. And
you have a Romanian person?
I should, yeah, thank you. It's coincidental. I didn't plan on this part, but yes, one of my board of directors for Confident Christianity for many years has been a woman who is her family's Romanian, and she's now over at Beeson Divinity School. But she is, she's served on my. I don't know if I should call her out or not, but yeah, she served on my board for a long time. So we've had a connection to Romania ever since the beginning of my ministry.
You don't have to say it, but thank you so much for mentioning, because the Romanian audience, will appreciate that a lot. Well, thank you so much for the time allowed for the Romanian audience. I encourage all who listen to this program, regardless if you are in America, all Romanians around the world, to get this book, and hopefully sometime soon also to translate somehow. And also I'll remember our audience that Mary Jo will be part of the Zoom conference for the Romanian audience in December. Thank you. God bless you. God bless your family and your ministry. Have a blessed day.
Thank you so much for hosting me.